a vivid one, which, as Barbara Kirschenblatt-Gimblet tells us, requires great care. For the visitors in the museum, in the presence of the pictorial artificial recreation, in most instances, but a single time. Frankly, I've been there twice, and I think that I'm just about ready to begin to understand it. It's so incredibly rich. To the written word, one may return, but the written word may also be lengthy. The pictorial, artifactual recreation must be succinct as well as forceful. And frankly, at moments as I walked through the galleries, I felt that I myself had become momentarily a part of the Polish Jewish past. The theme of Polin draws on Moshe Rothman's pithy, categorically Jewish, distinctly Polish, a phrase which, however, may be read in many ways. Let me convey my reading as I have come to it by visiting the galleries, but I must add also through reading the descriptions that Hanna Zaremska and Adam Teller have provided for the medieval through early modern periods. What I celebrate, in this case applaud, is the fluidity of the presentation, the ability to move through the galleries in whichever way the visitor likes. The experience becomes one, whole, integrated. It preserves memory alive. I was immediately reminded through both reading and viewing of the classic How Societies Remember of Paul Connerton. How does a society preserve its identity, its integrity, through the written word, through ritual, and through social action? Memory, as I have written about Italian, especially Roman Jews, and as many of you already are aware and have been made aware again, I know Italian Jews far better than I do those of Poland, and that's an understatement. The memory can be conservative in the positive sense, that it urges its possessors not to discard the values or essences of the past. Roman Jews, who are highly acculturated, indeed because of their millennial presence in the cities of the time of the ancient Romans, it's sometimes a question of who was acculturated, who the cultural pace setter, Jews or Christians. They were highly acculturated, and thus allowed, the memory was allowed to occur, but never so greatly, or change was allowed to occur, but never so greatly that it obscured their Jewish past. One must argue, as did Yosef HaKohen, who did not live in Rome, that biblical Hebrew, not Latin, was to be revered as the original language, bearing the true lamp of learning, and hence, by implication, that Hebraic wisdom outshone that of the Neo-Latin humanists. In like manner, Roman Jews might adopt Christian musical forms, but always within their own liturgical cycle. Just as Jewish rituals shirk to achieve the kind of transcendental sacrality attributed to the sacraments, especially the Eucharist. Rabbis were not, nor did they wish to be, priests. The Jews of Rome used Italian as their daily language, sometimes mixed with highly Italianized Hebraisms, but they would draw notarial texts, rents, contracts, testimony, so important for communal harmony in Hebrew, which, however, clearly betrays that they were thinking in Italian. Much of this acculturation is attributable, as I said, to the Jews' longevity in Rome, but it is also attributable to urbanization, to the fact that Italy itself as a whole was highly urbanized, in its north at least, from about the same time the Jews began to settle in Poland. Acculturation was an effect, too, of limited Jewish autonomy, which was forever being usurped by the growing integration of the Jews into the system of jus commune. They were formally denominated Jewish citizens. Roman law, jus commune, which is Roman law as modified and applied in the Italian cities. And it's an effect of a common diet. Romans today, Jews and non-Jews alike, who wish to resurrect early modern Roman dining, frequent the restaurants of the still so-called ghetto. Acculturation, in addition, was an effect of a contractual bargain with the papacy, certainly in Rome, which guaranteed Jewish life and limb, and even more, as long as the Jews abided by canonical restrictions. Pope Sixtus IV in 1475, 1478, most notably was furious at pseudo-judicial execution of all the Jewish men in the town of Trent on a spurious charge, and such charges always are, of ritual murder. This world would come apart, this Jewish world would come apart from 1555, when Paul IV edicted the ghetto, although even then, until 1751, the essential bargain of protection, under drastically reduced conditions, would be maintained. The year 1751 is crucial, and here I'm going to echo Adam, for it was events in Poland that brought the then Pope Benedict XIV to the brink of abandoning Jewish protection. He spoke out and said, what would Rudolph, who was of course the monk who preached killing Jews in 1146, what would Rudolph have said? And then he turns around and says, well, but we still must protect the Jews. In other words, I'd really like to get rid of them. And Benedict XIV was somebody who gave the Jews a very hard time, and he was also a very excellent canonist and a very excellent person in terms of knowledge of the Enlightenment. This was a very serious foe. He never rejected, as I said, protection completely, but he and his successors continually wavered. This vote was really a watershed. This instability recalls the sometimes precarious volatility of Polish Jewish existence, with a church that actively, through early university polemic or later supported important clergy, sustained the libels of blood and ritual murder. And here I wonder about the wonderful phrase paradisus Judaeorum that ends dominatus famulorum, if the famularum are not actually Jews because they are the sons of the famula of the servant Hagar. And that the phrase perhaps mean that, but that is for an expert to decide. Yet there were always leading churchmen who ignored the implications and who willingly entered virtual relationships with Jews. And this was the case of bishops depositing money, as we saw, and it was over this practice that Benedict XIV exploded. It is in the exhibits in Poland that one senses this Polish-Jewish difference, that which indeed created something categorically Jewish, yet distinctively Polish. For whereas Italian, again especially Roman Jewry, was so highly integrated, living with others in the city in a state of what I have called elsewhere a tense intimacy, the path I see in Poland, and the emphasis is on what I see, is one of intertwined destinies. Jews and Poles, and the other peoples of medieval and early modern Poland, almost but not quite symbiotic. I am certain some of you today will disagree with me, some preferring the direction of lesser blending, some that of greater. Yet is not that the point of the fluidity of the museum, its open-endedness, which also cautions that the kind of study of Polish Jewry which searches out commonality and interrelationship has only recently begun. The study not of two distinct peoples occupying the same place, but of two peoples constantly interacting and mutually influencing one the other. As put by Hanna Zaremska, throughout the exhibition, the coupling of Jewish history with the history of Poland is repeatedly highlighted. What I, again from my own perspective, observe in following the galleries is that tracing the course of Jewish life in Poland is to trace the destiny of early modern Poland itself. What happened in the eras of modern nationalism during the partition and after 1918 I will not address, although I do note that the path in post-French Revolutionary Poland seems to mirror that in Italy. When true integration became possible, in Italy with the end of the ghettos, it occurred rapidly. In Italy, and especially late pre-modern Rome, the Jews' civil integration brought legal minds to question the very existence of a confessional state, a state with an official religion and separate laws for separate people. They were pressing, though questioners were pressing, towards post-French and American revolutionary modernity. In Poland, I espy, please do not be upset with me for saying this, although I think Salo Baron, thinking of his marvelous thesis and his immortal ghetto and emancipation, would have agreed with me. What I espy in Poland is an entrenchment of the Middle Ages. Polish Jews, over time, were being made ever more dependent on charters, as they had once been in the early medieval West. They were in Poland as they had been in the East in the Nostri Judei Nostri of the kings and eventually the nobles, and indeed that's what determines their fate. If the kings decide or not decide to follow the canons of the church and actually to go way beyond them as the kings of France, England, and Spain ultimately did. Their direct attachment to the king or noble, before whom alone they, the Jews, were to be judged, enabled, again as in the early charters, the Jews to be permitted to live by statuta eorum, an elusive phrase, which means not simply Jewish law, but a composite of Jewish law and special privileges, such as the charters list. Likewise, Jews asked and received, as they did in Krakow in 1370 and again in Zamość in 1580, defensionem et protectionem, wording identical and not by accident with that contained in charters given in the West dating to the 9th century. Isaac Troki thus emphasizes the enabling function of the Jews, kiyumehem, charters, the opposite of legal integration. A further issue is the course of Jewish commerce, which is so well represented in the galleries. The early settlers, long-distance merchants with the maps of their routes on display, supplying needs in a forming society. These merchants morphed over the centuries into small traders, but some became the confidants of the upper nobility and even kings. The elegance of their wives, as seen in the portraits, says enormous amounts, in every sense, about the situation and the tenor of their lives. By contrast, the tavern keeper, which signals a whole new kind of Jewish existence, was most often elegance's contrary. What we see now is Jews active in markets, but most often this is the Jew of the small town or on the noble estate serving peasants. Poland as an entity was disintegrating. Power was going to the nobles. The peasants or serfs on the estate were tied to the soil. We have indeed gone back to a social structure that characterized medieval Europe before 1300. Yes, there were cities as we see in the exhibits, but more characteristically, the exhibits feature the town and the noble estate. 13th and 14th century Polish urbanization, with no city housing more than 800 Jews, was yielding, giving way as Poland reshaped its essential institutions. Unique Jewish districts, even separated by a wall or a trench, as in Gniezno, if I understood properly, in 1267, or the virtually Jewish city of Kazimierz from 1495, were instituted, although here, in